Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. I'm coming to you from Cambridge, Massachusetts. We are at iZotope HQ, and we have something really cool for you to check out. This is Dan Gonzalez, product manager here at iZotope, and he's going to tell us what's happening. How you doing, Dan?
Doing great.
So tell us, first of all, what does a product manager do at iZotope?
So a product manager, we lead the teams that build the products we're going to present to you today. We come up with the why behind we should be building these products, the impact of the business, and our teams come up with solutions. And those solutions come in the form of new features in Ozone 9, RX, Nectar, Neutron, all of our music production products and post-production products.
Right. So where do the ideas for these features come from? Do they come from in-house here? Are they coming from users, or where do they show up from?
Yeah, it's one of these things where we are really customer focused. So we do a lot of communication with our customers to understand the scenarios they're in and the behaviors they have inside of their DAWs. And from there, we can kind of paint a picture of where the little points of friction are, and then start to develop ways to solve those points of friction inside of Ozone or inside of whatever plugin they're using, frankly. So it's a very long and arduous process, but at the end, you come out with something really magical. And it's really fun watching a bunch of smart people, honestly, build something that's just going to change the game of mixing and mastering.
I bet. It has to be incredible.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the term magical there. I had a little tour of Ozone 9, which is what we're checking out today, and I'm blown away.
Awesome.
I truly, I see a lot of software, and the stuff that you guys are doing is really incredible.
That's great to hear.
Why don't we take a tour?
Awesome, we can do that. So, Mitch, I want to show you today some of the brand new features inside of Ozone 9 Advanced. The very first feature I want to show you is something called Master Rebalance. So Master Rebalance is a brand new tool powered by source separation technology. What we've done is we've introduced AI into a module inside of Ozone for the very first time. This module allows users to isolate and identify the different types of instruments inside of their master and then be able to control the gain of those instruments. So inside of this module, it's a pretty simple layout. When you look at it, you see a big spectrum view with a blue and gray spectrum, some instrument selectors at the bottom, and a gain control. So we kind of build these tools that are really powerful with simple interfaces because we want to give our users the ability to be very creative. This falls perfectly into that. The blue spectrum inside of the interface is the instrument that we're currently looking at, which is vocals. You can see that there's a lot of energy kind of in the mid-range here.
Right.
Bass, if you switch to bass, you can see that the spectrum switches to low-end energy. And then drums, it's kind of everywhere, so it's kind of all here. The gray spectrum in the background is actually everything else in the mix with that blue spectrum subtracted. So you can get an idea of like where your mix is and then where your instrument is in that mix.
And just to be clear here, we're actually seeing a stereo mix. You're not working with a multi-track, you're not dealing with separate stems or anything like that.
That's exactly right. No stems required, no multi-tracks required. We are separating these instruments at the stereo master.
That is incredible.
Yep. So the way you use this is you first pick an instrument, and then you have the ability to increase the gain of that instrument or decrease the gain of that instrument. So I want to show you how that works because it's pretty transparent. So let's listen to the vocals. Tie the shirt into another bowl. Take a dip into the stash you stole. If you think I'm gonna... So you can hear that the vocal, not only the lead vocal is being controlled, but the surrounding vocals in that chorus are also being controlled.
Right.
It's kind of like having a fader on your vocal group and being able to adjust that, but it's virtual. It doesn't
It's
exist.
incredible. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So you can bring the vocals down as you showed there. You could also boost them up.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Incredible.
The bass is a similar story. Let's listen to that.
I was really trying to focus there on the kick drum to hear whether that was changing. And the bass is coming up and coming down, but the kick drum is really staying right where it was.
It maintains the relationship between the bass and kick pretty well, which is, again, that word magical, right?
Right.
Pretty amazing. Let's take a listen to the drums. So it's got the kick, it's got the snare, it's got a good idea of what drums are, and it's allowing you to control that from that gain slider.
Right, right. And even though you don't have guitars, keyboards, by adjusting these three, you can still shape things around those. If you bring all three of those down, it has the effect of bringing the guitar up.
Exactly right.
And so you can kind of balance the whole mix just using those three different instruments.
That's exactly right. We also, there's one more aspect to this that we find incredibly creative for our users. That gain slider inside of any DAW, using Ozone Advanced, the mothership, or the Master Rebalance component module, that gain slider is automatable. So think about the creative possibilities that unlocks. You can now automate the gain of a vocal, bass, or drums over the course of a mix, either to add a creative element to it or to maybe correct something that you just don't have time to go find the stems or the multi-tracks for.
Right, or if you just want to touch something up, you just get to that last stage, you're going to master, you've already done the mix, you're happy with it, and all you want is the vocal just notched up just a little bit, or just pull the bass back just a little bit. Man, what an amazing tool for doing that.
Yep. First time we've ever done it, real-time source separation. It's an amazing tool, and we think it's a lot of power and a lot of freedom that we're giving all of our users out in the world, especially the ones who are focused on mastering or mixing their own or mastering their own mixes.
Right, right. Incredible.
Yeah. Awesome. So the next feature I want to show you is something called low-end focus. I'll pull that up for us right now. So low-end focus, it is a tool designed specifically for the low end only. First time we've ever done that for Ozone. Our dynamics, our vintage modules, our EQ, it's all it touches the entire frequency spectrum. But we've noticed that a lot of our users struggle with the low end, right? They're not in an environment like this where you're in a mastering studio, right? They're working in a little desk, maybe potentially halfway between the living room, the kitchen, or a modified storage closet. What does that lead to? Well, that leads to not being able to hear the low end very well, right? When you're on headphones, right? Do the car test, everything sounds terrible. What's going on? Probably the low end. So the low end focus is really aimed at correcting this issue. We're calling it muddiness. And its special thing that it brings to the table is it can identify the elements that make up muddiness in the low end and give you control over those and even change the sound of them. So we're calling it low end focus because it really does just that, focuses the low end for you. Quick look at the interface. You have a crossover view at the bottom here where you can focus in on where you want this processing to be applied. You can solo that if you want to listen to it even further. And then there are two main controls in this interface where you really are going to work hard you're really going to mess with, I guess you could say, in the master. There's the contrast control, which increases the contrast between the elements that make up muddiness, the transient elements, the bass elements. And then there are these character buttons, punchy and smooth. These change the sound of that processing.
Okay.
You can listen to that processing and then you can adjust the makeup gain as well. So, without further ado, I'd love to show you how it sounds.
Please.
All right. So we're going to listen to the chorus of this track, and I want you to focus in on the kick drum of this track and listen to how it changes over time. So we'll start with punchy and we'll increase contrast. Now let's switch to smooth and hear that. So the difference really is that punch is just adding punch. It's really hitting you in the chest, that kick drum. But when you adjust smooth, it's actually making it more round and fuller sounding. Regardless, you're getting that contrast between the transient elements and the bass elements, so you can really just dial up the contrast essentially, right?
Right. What's incredible to me is I was listening to the kick drum change, but the bass really wasn't changing within that. I mean, it was, you hear the bass become revealed more in certain frequency areas just because the character of the kick drum is changing. So you hear the bass more clearly. But even that's incredible because you're kind of unveiling that bass sound by allowing the kick to be shaped a little bit differently. That's just amazing to me that you can separate them like that.
Yeah, and we can do the same thing actually. It's good that you brought up the bass because we can actually decrease the contrast in this mix and we can hear how that affects the bass inside of this mix. So let's start on punchy and I can show you what that sounds here. you can hear how it's really bringing out the bass elements. Now let me switch between punchy and smooth. You can really hear the differences between these character controls.
Alright, and if you still won't go, tell your sister that I told her so. Tie the shirt into another bow. Take a dip into the stash you stole. If you think I'm gonna leave that golden girl up alone all night, I may have tricked myself. She could've shaken, so I guess you might be right.
So that's absolutely incredible. So we're actually listening here. We're in the mastering room at iZotope. The acoustics are incredible, and we have incredible monitoring. And it's almost like there's another octave being added to that kick drum,
Yeah.
just because you've revealed it by shaping the bass in that way. And the other thing that's very interesting about this is it almost sounds like the rest of the mix has changed, just because you've opened up that bottom end and allowed everything else to speak differently. What an amazing processing module.
And that's what we want to do. We want to give our users a lot of firepower for mastering and mixing, just to make their lives easier and more creative, honestly.
Right, right. Do you see this being used during the mixing process? Would you, for example, put this on the drum kit as a whole on a stem or something like that?
It's hard to prescribe a workflow because I've seen so many people do so many different things.
Right.
I would say that people should experiment with this and figure out where it works best. You know what I mean? If it was me, I would be experimenting it on bass, drums, the entire mix, maybe just an entire drum stem, just about everywhere to really figure out where this fits into my workflow. In a mastering context, I think it's great for the end of the chain. Maybe you're in your DAW and you're working on an entire mix and you throw this on at the end to really just control that muddiness. So there are various different workflows that we can prescribe, but I think that people should really take this tool and figure it out for themselves.
Right, yeah, there's a lot of room there to just, like you say, experiment with different applications for it on just about any source, right? Anything that has bottom end to it
Exactly.
may benefit from this. And the same thing with the master rebalance, really. You could take a drum kit recording and kind of shape things even a little bit just with that, although the elements are going to be not quite as complex as what's happening with a full mix, but still, the way that everything interacts all affects the final outcome. And so there's a lot of possibilities here.
Totally. So that's the two new modules inside of Ozone 9 Advanced. I want to switch over to more of a workflow improvement. So if you remember, in 2017, we released the first mastering assistant inside of Ozone. Since then, we have gotten a lot of feedback about the capabilities behind this. And one of the things that stood out to us was that people wanted more creative starting points for their master. So what we did is we introduced the vintage mode. You'll see this inside of the Master Assistant view. This vintage mode leverages all of the vintage modules inside of Ozone. We have the vintage limiter, the vintage compressor, and the vintage EQ. And we're actually bringing those modules down to Ozone Standard so that users can also take advantage of that in the Ozone Standard SKU. So we're getting a starting point for your master using all the vintage modules. So I'll go ahead and let this do its thing. We can take a listen to what it sounds like afterwards.
Alright, and if you still won't go, tie the shirt into another bow. Take a dip into the stash you stole. If you think I'm gonna leave that golden girl up alone all night, I may have tricked myself. She could've shaken, so I guess you might be right.
So, as you can see, it's given us a starting point for a signal chain. This isn't a complete master. This is a starting point, and you can use the rest of Ozone to get creative. So let's listen to the before and after, and you can really hear what's happening inside of this new vintage chain.
Alright, and if you still won't go, tell your sister that I told her so. Tie the shirt into another bow. Take a dip into the stash you stole. If you think I'm gonna leave that golden girl up alone all night, I may have tricked myself. She could've shaken, so I guess you might be.
So it's obviously louder, right?
Right.
But that's what we want. We want it to get to a point where we're at our initial loudness, but it's also added that kind of sizzle to it, that character that you get with the vintage modules. The way it works is it analyzes your entire master and it makes a decision about spectral balance first with the EQ. We kind of set your master up for success here by saying, hey, your EQ needs, in this case, a little bit more low end and a little bit more high end, and just a touch of mid-range there. Then we move on to the vintage EQ. The vintage EQ is based off of a Pultec style EQ, so it has that simultaneous boost and cut mechanism. I actually kind of want to increase that a little bit, so I'm going to put my own settings in here to make that a little bit more drastic. It's very sensitive, but it's a fun tool and it's a really nice color box. The vintage compressor is listening to the dynamic range of your track, and it's making a decision. Is the dynamic range falling within a good range? If it is, it actually decides to turn itself off. It still puts itself in the chain. If it isn't, it activates it and it brings a little bit of control to your master that it didn't have before. And then lastly, we have the vintage limiter and the maximizer. And these are working together in a sense. Vintage limiter is getting you that character of vintage. I'm going to actually turn up that character in here because I really like the sound of it. And the maximizer is really just a brick wall, catching all those peaks that could potentially come through. And together they actually do a really nice job of adding character and getting you to your starting point without you having to like find a preset, tweak it, and realize you might have messed something up, because it's typically the experience we hear from our Ozone users.
Right. Yeah. So the assistant, when it looks at your audio then, is it basing the decision it makes as far as its recommendation on looking at other recordings, or how does it do that? What is it thinking about when it's looking at your master?
It's a great call out. So when we introduced Master Assistant, it's a combination of machine learning and some DSP that we have here in-house. Between those two, we can discern styles and general ranges where things should fall into. And then we also have some in-house sound designers that can make some really good recommendations for how parameters should change to fit those styles. So with a lot of, again, I'll use the term magic happening inside the office and machine learning and our R&D department, it somehow translates to this incredible tool that gets people to their starting point in a matter of minutes, basically.
Right, amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea of it being a starting point, and even you yourself were adding, half a dB here, half a dB there, increasing the color. So it really gives you a place to get rolling.
Yep. And
I think that really helps a lot of people, because when you sit down, you have so many options, and there's 13 modules now in Ozone. So which one do you choose where, and what order do you put them in, and all those kind of things.
Exactly.
So just having a place to get rolling with your masters is really valuable.
I agree. Yeah, it's a wonderful tool, and I think my favorite part about it is that no control is black boxed. Every single control that Master Assistant touches, you can touch and learn from. So you can actually go in there and start learning about mastering. How does it fit into my workflow? What controls affect what?
Nice.
That's a super powerful tool.
Right.
Yeah. So the next thing I want to show you is the environment of Ozone, the everything you can touch, everything you can see aspect of Ozone. If you've been watching this, you've probably noticed that I've full screened Ozone. This is something that has never happened before inside of Ozone, especially in the standalone application. Users can stretch Ozone's interface to fit their workspace. And then we've also done some updates to many different aspects of how metering works and some of the controls as well. So the first thing I'll call out is the EQ. So the EQ is pretty much the most important part of the mastering chain. And we've noticed that a lot of people get overwhelmed when they look at our interfaces. So what we've done is we've actually reduced the complexity of this interface so that people don't have blank canvas syndrome when they look at one of our products and they're like, where do I start, right?
Right.
Reduced borders, increased the metering, made it very HUD-based and focused so that people can stay inspired and feel creative while they're in the mastering world.
Nice.
Right? Then we also rebuilt the way our meters work inside of Ozone. So if you notice, while we're actually looking at this, the metering inside of Ozone is a lot smoother as well. If you open up Ozone 8, which I'll do right now for you, you can actually see the differences side by side. So let's open up Ozone 8. So if you look at the metering inside of Ozone 8 versus Ozone 9, you can see that the Ozone 8 metering in the spectrum is a little bit more jittery than you ever realized before. Let's take a look at them side by side. So this is Ozone 8's previous metering in the spectrum, and this is now Ozone 9's.
Ozone 9 is so much smoother, isn't it? It almost makes me feel nervous watching Ozone 8. It's like, I feel like I've had too much caffeine.
Yeah, right? Exactly. I would say it's arguably more accurate too, because you don't feel overwhelmed by that metering.
Right.
And now with the resizability, you can see the spectrum with more fidelity.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's one of those things you don't think about, and I never noticed before, never thought about it. I mean,
Yeah.
the metering is always great in Ozone 8 and the previous versions as well, but this is just a big improvement.
Yeah, it's awesome. So the other meter that we've touched inside of Ozone to make it smoother and more accurate is something called the gain reduction trace meter. You'll see this in modules like the Vintage Limiter or the Maximizer, where you're actually tracing gain reduction over time. And you can see inside of Ozone 9, this meter just flows smooth as ice from right to left. Whereas in Ozone 8, it's actually pretty jittery, right?
Right, right. And then having the full screen display with the bigger display makes it even more informative as you're looking at it.
Exactly. So you can actually kind of understand where that gain reduction is going to happen inside of your music. So if you turn this down, you start to see how it traces along that. And the difference here is incredible.
Right.
So that's some of the new enhancements we've made to the metering and the controls inside of Ozone. We've made a big overhaul to the signal chain as well. The signal chain is this area along the top middle of Ozone 9. And for many years, it's been restricted to only 6 modules. We've now lifted that restriction. So users can now add as many modules that Ozone has available in their signal chain, or as many modules as their CPU can handle. So we've seen users use 20 different motherships. That's being dramatic, but
Right.
we've seen people use a lot of different plugins and stack Ozones, and we feel like we needed to really lift these restrictions from Ozone to give them more creative freedom. And the last thing that's great about lifting this restriction is that we've made some DSP and performance enhancements to Ozone. So when you're actually using Ozone inside of your DAW, you're going to notice that it uses less CPU, which is
Nice.
something that people need in their mixes. There's nothing worse than trying to just finish your mix and then your computer starts choking or crapping out. You're like, oh man, what's going on? Usually, before it was usually Ozone. Now we've actually gone in and optimized a lot of those performance issues. So people are going to have an easier time using Ozone in their mixes.
Nice.
Yeah. One more thing I wanted to show you inside of the standalone application is something called a Match EQ. I don't know if you've heard of this before, but it was previously kind of buried inside of the interface of the EQ. In this version of Ozone 9, we've actually brought it out of the EQ and made it its own module. So what this does, it allows you to take the spectral balance of maybe a source, like a reference track, right? And then allow you to apply that EQ to your music.
Right.
So what we can do here is we can take our reference track, we have one playing right in here, and we can capture that. Once we're finished capturing, we then play our music, the thing that we want applied to it.
Alright, and if you still won't go, tell your sister that I told her so. Tie the shirt into another bow.
And now we have some controls to adjust how the reference track's EQ adjusts the spectrum of our track. So you can do that using the amount controls and the smoothing controls.
Alright, and if you still won't go, tell your sister that I told her so. Tie the shirt into another bow. Take a dip into the stash.
You can even adjust where you want this processing to affect the spectrum with these crossovers here.
Alright, and if you still won't go, tell your sister that I told her so. Tie the shirt into another.
And that's the brand new Match EQ. And one thing that we feel is going to make people just freak out and love this is that we've now added presets to this because it's its own module. So if you're inside of Ozone's new Match EQ module, you can save any track that you match into the presets and recall it later.
Nice.
So if you want to reference one, save that, pull it up later. If you're in a mix later, you want to pull up that reference track you loved and use in that previous project, you've got it right here ready to go as a module preset inside of Ozone 9.
Very nice.
Yeah. So that's a lot of what's going on inside of Ozone. But I want to take a step outside of Ozone and talk about something that touches multiple different products inside of iZotope's music production suite.
Okay.
So let's jump over to Logic. And I want to show you something called tonal balance control. Now, if you were around and familiar with the Ozone 8 launch, we released a product called tonal balance control. Tonal balance control is the idea that there are kind of discernible ranges for many different styles of music. And within those ranges, there's a kind of a perfect balance that helps people achieve perfect tonal balance, achieve a perfect master, right? So we decided to say, what if people could visualize tonal balance and then make decisions based on that visualization, right? So with the power of interplugin communication and all of our in-house wizards, I guess you could call them, we put together a tool that sits at the very end of your mix, visualizes the tonal balance of your mix or master, and then allows you to dive into different plugins that are compatible with interplugin communication, and then make adjustments for tonal balance. We've since then improved it to add a few new features throughout the entire interface. The first thing I'll call out is that it's now completely resizable, just like Ozone 9. So you can really take a look at what your tonal balance is and really not feel restricted to this tiny interface. You can see how much better it is just to actually have this huge interface taking up your entire screen. It allows you to focus on what you're doing. The next thing that we did is we actually added more genre targets. A lot of people love that we introduced bass heavy, modern, and orchestral targets into tonal balance. These were targets that were generated using thousands of tracks fed into a machine learning code and spitting out these ranges. So we've added more genre targets to tonal balance control. These are generated by analyzing thousands of tracks, and then we spit out the tonal balance of those in a visualization so you can kind of see if your music is matching the tonal balance of what you're really going for. We introduced bass heavy, orchestral, and modern in the first version, but now we've added 10 more. So you can see we have country, we have folk, we have jazz, we have reggae, pop. We have many more options for people to choose from. The next thing that we changed as well is the ability to solo the different regions that are inside of tonal balance control. So if you'll notice, while you're playing music, you can get a general idea of where things are sitting. But if you want to listen even further, now you can actually solo that region. You can isolate that region and really just zoom in on where the problems are in your tonal balance. And the last thing that we added is that we expanded the interplugin communication to touch not only Neutron and Ozone EQs, but now Relay, which is our utility plugin, and Nectar 3, our vocal plugin that we released in 2018.
Wow, so it's really become a whole environment.
Exactly. So if you want to open up the tonal balance control menu here, you can jump to the bass relay. You can adjust the gain of that relay now, so you can, because tonal balance isn't something that's just EQ focused. You can adjust level to change tonal balance. You can jump over to your lead vocal track and adjust the vocal EQ in there. And of course, we have Neutron, which is available inside of tonal balance control. And of course, the EQ is available here. So it saves you time in diving into your mix. You're doing everything from a single window at the end of your mix, adjusting the tonal balance, getting it ready for the world to hear.
That's amazing.
And that's everything that's really new inside of Ozone 9 Advanced.
That is a lot.
It's a lot of stuff.
It's a lot of stuff. Some incredible tools there. I mean, it's hard to imagine how that actually works, the way you can reach into the finished mix, if you will, and be able to operate on all these things. Is really, really incredible. Congratulations.
Thanks, man. We appreciate it. We're really excited for everybody to see it.
No doubt. I can't wait to get my hands on it. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Great. We'll get you hooked up with that.
Right on. Thanks so much. Appreciate the tour. And thanks for hosting us here at HQ in Cambridge. We appreciate you taking the time to show us Ozone 9. Really exciting.
Anytime, Mitch.
And thank you for joining me at iZotope HQ in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater.